Hey, what's up YouTube? I hope everybody's having a great day. Today's video, I'm going to cover 3 mistakes that I've made while wiring my addition. If you haven't seen my other videos, we're in the process of building an addition to our house. So I've been kind of documenting some of the steps when we did the foundation, when we did the framing, and we're in a state where we're doing our HVAC and we're doing the electrical. We got this house pretty much wired up, and I had the inspector stop by last week and he has pointed out 3 issues that I had. Want to make a quick video to share those. If you are doing wiring yourself as a homeowner, this might save you some trouble. So let's jump right into it. Real quick here, before we get into it, just wanted to share what we're doing here. We got this sub panel that will run this whole addition. This is a 4-gauge wire that's coming in here. This panel is rated for 125 amps. It's a GE panel. However, we are using an 80 amp breaker on the main panel because we figure we don't need all 120 amps. And we're using just 15 amp breakers for our bedrooms. And then there's a 30 amp breaker that's going to be used for the air conditioning. Now, all of our electrical outlets got wired with this 12-gauge wire, and then our lights got wired with this 14-gauge wire. Okay, so the first mistake that I made that actually I have no idea about was the size of the boxes that I was using for my outlets. Now you see, according to code apparently, that if you have more than 2 wires that are coming into your outlet box, you have to have a bigger box. And you can kind of see the difference here. The deeper size allows you to make more connections and it gives you more space for those wires in there. Okay, so the second mistake that I made was very simple, and that is staple location. So according to code, when you have a box like this for an outlet and you have wires coming into it, you need to have staples on your wires that are within 12 inches of the box. So in some locations, I have this wire that was stapled on the other stud that's adjacent to this box, which is not close enough. So I had to add some additional staples to get near the box. This was a pretty simple fix, so not a big deal, but just make sure you're doing that and you won't have any issues with it. Okay, so the third mistake that I've made, which was actually the biggest deal, was mixing different wire types. So as I mentioned before, we use 15 amp breakers and we are using 12-gauge wire for our outlets. Now, 12-gauge wire allows you to run up to 20 amps, and we figured we really don't need 20 amps, but in case in the future we do need 20 amps, we would already have wire that's rated for it, so it's already in the walls and there's nothing we have to do to upgrade that. What we'd have to do is just replace the breaker and the outlet itself that's rated for 20 amps. Now the lighting that we ran, I ended up actually using 14-gauge wire, and I had a connection from a 12-gauge outlet and it went to my lights. So apparently this is a no-no. If you're using 12-gauge wire, you're not allowed to use 14-gauge wire on that same circuit. So basically you cannot cross-contaminate. If you're using all 14-gauge wire, it all has to be 14-gauge. Or if you're using all 12-gauge wire, it all has to be 12-gauge. So to fix that, I just had to run my power all the way down to the breaker panel, and I had to make sure that all of my lights all have this white Romex cable, which is 14 gauge, and there's no contamination. So the reasoning behind it apparently is that if somebody in the future other than you that didn't wire this thing, and let's say they wanted to upgrade the breaker to a 20 amp breaker, and they look inside the panel box and they see a yellow cable which is telling them that, you know, this is already all rated for it, but somewhere down in your circuit you actually have 14-gauge wire which is not rated for 20 amps, so you could actually overload this line. Now the chances of that happening are actually fairly slim because I was just using this for lights which are all LEDs anyways, and they barely use any power. But that is code, it is city code, so we had to abide by it, just had to make a few changes. Wasn't too big of a deal, but it's just something that I learned, and I'll know not to make that mistake in the future. Hey, well, I hope you found this video helpful, and if you're in the process of doing your wiring, hopefully this was able to avoid repeating the same mistakes that I have made, and also wanted to share some of our progress with the installation upstairs. I'm going to release another video here shortly, more in depth on the electrical and HVAC that we're doing. So you guys have a great day, enjoy it, and we'll see you next time.